"Aw, he can't hurt anything way up here," said the first boy, his eyes on the football game below. Ribsy looked at the hot dog and swallowed. The boy obligingly broke off a piece and dropped it on the concrete for Ribsy, who gobbled it up. It was the first food he had had in a long time that tasted like home. He wished he had more. For some strange reason, the two boys were now pounding one another on the back. "Boy, oh boy," one of them was saying, "a touchdown for Taylor High." Then he stuffed the last of his hot dog into his mouth. Ribsy lost interest in the boy after that and wandered up and down the steps that separated the rows of bleachers. He had never seen so many obliging people in one place before in all his life. All he had to do was sit down and stare at someone eating a hot dog, and a piece was almost sure to be broken off and dropped at his feet. At first, Ribsy gobbled up both the bun and the weenie, but in a little while he became choosy, rejecting the bun if it had mustard on it, and finally skipping the bun altogether and just swallowing the wieners. With family food in his stomach and so many kind people around him, Ribsy was happy. He began to look for a way to get in on the excitement below. He trotted along the wall that rimmed the field, and when the cheering was especially loud, he put his paws up on the edge of the wall and barked. He was barking from sheer excitement, and also because he saw below him some boys about Henry's age who were standing on the ledge of the field trying to look important. "Look!" squealed a girl. "A dog cheering for Taylor High." "Isn't he darling?" said another girl. "Look at his cute collar trimmed with rhinestones. Maybe we should make him our mascot." A boy said, "Somebody better get him out of here. A dog can wreck a football game." But the game was so exciting with the score 7-6 in favor of Zachary Taylor High that no one wanted to take his eyes from the players long enough to remove a dog from the stadium. One team grabbled the ball and raced toward one end of the field. Before the boy who carried the ball was able to cross the line for a touchdown, the other team managed to capture the ball and went racing off to the opposite end of the field. The game was so close that no one was paying any attention to Ribsy. He was free to explore the stadium. One team made a touchdown, and then the other team made a touchdown. Finally, down at the other end of the scoreboard, Ribsy found a ramp that led through a sort of tunnel that opened on the nice green grass. "We want a touchdown! We want a touchdown!" the crowd was chanting. Since all the boys Ribsy had ever known who tumbled around on grass were glad to have a dog romp with them, Ribsy ran out on the field confident that he was welcome. The grass was so cool to his paws and so fragrant to his nose that he had to stop for a good roll. With his 4 feet in the air, he squirmed and wriggled. It was bliss. Only the fun chasing a ball made him stop. The quarterback from Chester A. Arthur High School had the ball and was running down the field toward the end zone with the Zachary Taylor team after him. The boys and girls in the grandstand were screaming, yelling mob. The hands on the clock on the scoreboard showed that only seconds were left to play, and those seconds were passing quickly. Naturally, Ribsy wanted to chase after the fastest runner, the boy who was carrying the ball. He raced down the edge of the field, avoiding the younger boys who, to his delight, had begun to chase him. A newspaper photographer, anxious to photograph the moment that would decide the game, ran along the side of the field with the boys chasing Ribsy. To Ribsy, this was all part of the fun. "Come on, Arthur!" screamed half the mob who attended Chester A. Arthur High School. "Tackle him! Tackle him!" screamed the other half who attended the Zachary Taylor High School. This was the most fun Ribsy had enjoyed since the boys and girls had chased him around the schoolyard with a lunch bag in his mouth. He eluded the younger boys who were chasing him along the side of the field. When he was opposite the quarterback who was carrying the ball, he put on a burst of speed and darted onto the field in front of the player. Ribsy hoped he would drop the ball so he could have a turn at chasing it. The Arthur High School quarterback was so busy trying to stay ahead of a player who was about to dive at his knees that he did not see the dog. Just before he would have crossed the line for a touchdown, he tripped over Ribsy, fell flat on his face, and dropped the ball, which was snatched up by a player from the Taylor High School team. Flash bulbs popped. The last second ticked off the clock of the scoreboard. The referee blew his whistle. The crowd went wild. Drums boomed. Cowbells rattled. The game was over. Thanks to Ribsy, Zachary Taylor High School had won 13-12. To Ribsy's surprise, he found himself tackled not by a football player, but by a boy about Henry's age. The knees of his jeans were patched, and his hair had been cut for some time. "Gotcha," said the boy, hanging on tight. It was all a game to Ribsy. "That your dog?" asked a photographer. The boy saw a chance to be important for a few minutes. "Sure," he said. "Sure, he's my dog." Ribsy stopped struggling because he needed to pant. He let his tongue hang out of his mouth while he tried to catch his breath. "What's his name?" inquired the photographer, pulling out a pencil and paper. "Junior," answered the boy promptly. It was the first name that popped into his head, and the reason it popped into his head was that Junior was his own nickname. It was a nickname he did not like one bit. Junior, the man wrote it down. "That's a funny name for a dog." "He was named after his father," the boy answered quickly. "What's your name?" asked the photographer. "Joe Saylor," answered the boy, leaving off the Junior on purpose. "Address?" He told where he lived, a street half a mile from the stadium. By now, Zachary Taylor High School students were swarming around Joe Saylor to pet the dog that helped to win the game. Under the circumstances, Joe was not going to put Ribsy down, not when everyone thought it was his dog who was the hero of the game. It began to seem to Joe that Ribsy really was his dog. As for Ribsy, he was enjoying the attention he was getting, and after all, Joe was a boy. Ribsy liked boys. Joe carried Ribsy off the field. Every time he was about to put Ribsy down, someone said, "That's the dog that saved the game." Boys were satisfied to pet Ribsy, but girls were inclined to squeal and say, "Isn't he darling?" Some of them hugged him, and one girl went so far as to kiss him. Both Joe and Ribsy were having a good time. It was not until the crowd had thinned out that Joe released Ribsy. Joe then went into the grandstand. Not having anything better to do, Ribsy tagged along. Joe walked along between the rows of seats looking for something, and Ribsy walked along too. Joe picked up a nickel and a penny, and several rows farther up the stadium he found a dime. Someone's hot dog change that had been dropped and had rolled away during the excitement of the game. Ribsy examined the wads of wax paper and had been wrapped around hot dogs. It was getting dark before Joe found another nickel, and by that time the stadium was almost empty. "Only 21 cents, Joe remarked to Ribsy. "I do better at college games." When Joe left the stadium, Ribsy followed. It seemed almost like old times when he used to follow Henry. "Where are you going?" Joe asked Ribsy. Then he bent to examine the dog's collar under the streetlight. There was no dog's license. Joe shrugged and started toward home. One of his shoes was untied, and his shoelace flopped as he walked. Ribsy did not have any place to go, so he went along too. When Joe came to an old house with a sagging porch and peeling paint, Ribsy followed him around to the back and right up the steps. Inside, someone was practicing a piano. Plink, plunk, plunk, over and over. Joe groaned. "Mom's making Darlene practice," he muttered. Ribsy looked expectantly at the door, which he was sure would be open for him. A boy like Joe would not leave a dog out on the porch now that it was supper time. "Don't you have any place to go?" Joe asked Ribsy. Ribsy's answer to this was short, eager bark. It turned out that Ribsy was right about Joe. The boy bent over, took off the red rhinestone-trimmed collar that old Miss Frawley had given Ribsy. He stuffed it into his pocket and said, "That's a sissy collar for a dog like you." Then he opened the door and said, "Come on in." Ribsy stepped onto the worn linoleum of the kitchen floor, and Joe closed the door behind him. I miss you all, and I look forward to seeing you guys soon. Bye.